I don't think there's anything purer than two guys in a cage, no balls, no sticks, no bats, no help, no team, and just see which man is better. And as a pastor and as a Bible teacher, I think that God made men masculine. He made humanity male and female, and men and women are different. Not that one is good and the other's bad. That's why I married a woman. I'm very glad to be married to her. But I think men are made for combat, men are made for conflict, men are made for dominion,
All right.
and it doesn't matter what you.
Let me stop right there, just real quick. You guys want to have at it first before Matt has at it? What do you think about it, V?
Well,
so far?
I definitely want to hear from Matt. And I think it's interesting. It just gets into definitions, doesn't it? And it's interesting where he begins. Sort of emphasizing this idea of sort of individual man versus another man, and then says, and then men are meant to be masculine. The implication being that we're at our most masculine when we're sort of the lone man, the lone wolf.
Yeah.
Especially in combat, aggressive combat, of domination over someone else.
Yeah.
That's the expression of masculinity, which I think. I agree with you. I would say that's a bit problematic definition.
It might be John Wayne-ish. It might be Rambo-ish.
Yeah, Rambo-ish.
I mean,
that's a great example.
So he says, I think something good. God made people male and female. I think that's a truth that needs to be affirmed in a modern day that I think has lost its common sense about that. But then he mixes up things, I think, that make it problematic with what he says. And in fact, if you think about it, you can maybe say men are made to dominate if you maybe interpret it in the right way, in my opinion. If you're speaking about what your understanding is of the creation mandate, that's sketchy. But to say men are made to be in combat, I mean, in the garden, what were they supposed to be combating? I mean, it's almost like it's like a Genesis 3 type view almost, it seems like. Pastor Bob, what do you think?
Well, you guys have said it well. It's the question is, what does it mean to be masculine? We're all about that, and probably his examples are not helpful.
Now, Matt, I hope we didn't eat up all the pie. What's your take? You can disagree with us; it's fine, but have at it.
No, I'm actually curious. Who gave the first piece of feedback there? I'm trying to look. I can tell Pastor Bob is.
That's me, VOCAB.
VOCAB. Okay, and then who spoke after VOCAB?
Vermone.
Okay, so Vermone said it all comes down to definition.
Yeah.
Nailed it. I mean, I think that's exactly right. One of the things that's clear to me is that, is that Mark Driscoll is in that clip is getting behind cage fighting.
Yes, but he is. It's from something called Fighting Politics, a DVD, and he's 100% supporting it.
He's getting behind it, and that's because it does a lot of good work for him. There's no doubt to me that if it was something else that Driscoll could point to as the instance of healthy masculinity, of kind of propping up what I think is his project with respect to establishing certain gender roles, he would do that. But cage fighting's hot right now, and so cage fighting's the one that Driscoll goes to. So yeah, I mean, I think Verma is absolutely right when he says that this lone wolf idea, this John Wayne idea. That's what I think Driscoll, and to be fair, not just Driscoll, but I think a lot of people are after when the rugged individualism of the American man. That idea is in vogue again in the United States, in vogue in a big way for a lot of cultural reasons, I'd assume. And so cage fighting becomes what we appeal to prop up that very narrow and dangerous notion of a man.
Yeah, and I think this will get us into some good discussions on what is manhood and sort of the good things, the bad things that are being promoted in relation to this. It's interesting. I mean, you're right. I think the MMA is sort of a good step into maybe this broader. I'm seeing it within the culture and then within churches as well.
We're gonna do probably the next show really focusing on what you're about to probably say. Fight churches.
Well, yeah. I mean, not literally fight churches, but just
no. There are literally fight churches.
Really?
Yeah, we're going to talk about those next show. But go ahead. Sorry. I don't mean to distract you with insanity.
Well, it's this window into this world where to be a man is to like drink lots of beer, smoke a cigar, be into your wife, talk about how hot your wife is, right? And how she does all these different things like sexually for you. It's interesting. It's just it's a very aggressive form of male expression, if we could put it that way. I almost think of a peacock, like just how much of yourself can you sort of put out there, and how and it's expressed in this. Yeah, I'm into MMA. I smoke cigars. I drive a pickup truck. All these different things. And what's happened, I think, is churches have sort of taken that and put a light Christian glaze over it and say, but also you love Jesus, and there's their Christian male. And I just think what I'm observing is. The reality is, like, not a lot of guys are that way, but they're wanting to be that way because they think that's what it means to be that way, and therein is the trouble.
And some of those things, Ramon, I think are okay. In fact, I think a guy can do those to the glory of God. You can smoke your cigar to the glory of God. Yeah. You can drive your pickup truck, I think, to the glory of God. You can talk about your wife being attractive. I don't know about the other stuff to the glory of God, I believe. Yeah. And do that. And I think we want to say, okay, there ain't nothing wrong with that. Hit it, homie. You ain't got to. But that's not the biblical definition we're saying of masculinity. Yeah. We're saying that could be an expression if done right, I think. Yeah. But I want to Christianity is diverse, I guess, is part of the point we want to make by this. Matt, do you want to comment before I play some more of this Driscoll clip?
No, I'd like to hear the rest.
All right, here we go.
Due to a bunch of guys, I mean, you could put them in the worst public high school and tell them that they need to just, be into their feelings and talk about their feelings and cry a lot and finger paint their inner life. And at the end of the day, they're still going to want to throw down. And when they go to recess, two guys are going to go at it and see which one is the dude. And that's just the way men are made. So we either allow that.
All right, I want to stop there real quick. So he first of all, again, so people have different takes on this. Some say there's the crass obnoxiousness that I hate about Driscoll. To me, this is part of the reason I was attracted to him, in certain ways still am. I think that's funny and entertaining the way he's describing his point. Some people have a problem with that. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. To me, this clip's not about Driscoll. It's about, is he right about this? Because a lot of Christians agree with him. Now, they may not say it the same way. That basically, look, men are made this way. They're going to do it. So we've got to do something. When we finish the clip, you'll hear how he's saying it's essentially a solution to masculinity.
Yeah. Well, notice that the contrast, really a false sort of split there. A man is someone who fights. A man is not someone who has feelings, right? Or talks about his feelings,
right?
I mean, he sort of intentionally sets it up that way.
Yeah, finger paint his inner life, though. That's just a classic phrase.
That is funny.
I was just like, what I'm saying is, I think Driscoll is wrong. He has a couple good points, I believe, about that there is a such thing as distinction of sexes, and he does make the point when one's not better. He says that. Now, some people say, well, I don't think he practices that. Okay, but he does say that. That's good. But there's a lot of bad stuff in there. Matt, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Driscoll is he's an entertainer. I mean, and I don't want to make this about Mark Driscoll,
right, yeah,
as if he holds a unique position. I think he speaks for, I actually think he has a position that's in lockstep with the majority of mainstream American culture. Yeah. I mean, you watch the Super Bowl.
Yep.
All the commercials are selling the exact idea of masculinity that Driscoll's selling. So he can present something that he thinks is countercultural, and that might do a good job of kind of rallying the base. Yeah, we're doing something different, but at least clear to me that he just reflects a wider view of American culture. And now there's nothing countercultural at all about what he's saying. I think that, a countercultural view of masculinity would be to say, a guy who refused to get married. See, I'm a Christian, so I follow a guy who refused to get married, hung out with 12 other dudes who left their families, left their jobs, their respectable work that they had, and they begged along the way to tell people about the good news. Now, that's the type of thing that, at least on Driscoll's account of masculinity, there's no room for the life of Jesus in there. That's what Jesus and his disciples did, and I don't think that that's countercultural. Now, that's something that's going to get people's attention. That's not going to make for a good Super Bowl ad, but it's probably not going to make for a good sermon in Driscoll's church either, because it doesn't fit what he's been talking about.
Pastor Bob.
Well, I think I'd like to get into some of the more debatable issues, because I think setting up Driscoll and then sort of criticizing his comments is just too easy.
Right.
Let's do something a little bit more difficult.
All right, let me finish the clip, and then we'll do that. Ramon, after this, we'll
in a way that is violent and inappropriate, which is what a lot of guys do through criminal activity, or we put it together as a viable, legitimate sport and let men be men and do what men do, and let the other fat, lazy men sit around and criticize them while watching.
There you go, V. That's your cue.
Well, let me take it in the direction I think Bob is suggesting. I think there's some interesting questions here in terms of then. So what, maybe what is appropriate masculinity? Are we saying sports that do have a certain sense of violence to them? And so MMA is the example here, but there's there's boxing, there's football, there's other things like that. How do we what's the Christian view on those type of things?
And let me quickly add. I think that last comment you got to clip into the way Driscoll is going, and I think many people as well, and to some extent, probably a little bit of us as well. He made the distinction between this is what men do. We debated that already. They're going to do it. That's who they are, and so they can do it inappropriately, criminal activity, or they can do it appropriately in a sport that has rules and regulations. I mean, that's clearly what he's saying.
Yeah.
And again, wherever you draw that line, and sports. A lot of sports have injuries. A lot of sports are violent. I think we should talk about football too, just to broaden it out. Games that have rules and regulations. So in fairness to Driscoll, I think that's an important point.
This from the Baker's Dictionary of Christian Ethics. It says that competitive sports, whether an individual or team effort, should ideally involve no intention to injure the opponents. The overwhelming consideration as to the morality of a given sport would therefore be 1. The intent to injure, 2. The emphasis placed on the activity as related to other responsibilities, and 3. The use of adequate safety precautions. And that's from Christopher Riley, kind of an old school ethics book. Matt Morin, what do you think about a broader view of Christian view of sports as we have a few more minutes here on the show?
Yeah, I appreciate the question of. I mean, I think the question of intention is important. From a certain ethical perspective, intention gets difficult to always parse. Being that y'all told me that you're reform types, that as well as anybody, that our heart's intentions are always masked by us. We can say that our intentions are one thing, but we know that the heart is deceitful and wicked above all else. And so we may not think that our intentions are a certain way, but they may in fact be. So I appreciate the attempt to separate intention from action, but I ultimately think that's a dead end. I think we need to take a look at action and intention together.
What about if the ultimate goal of the sport involves, by necessity, having to, in some way, injure or come right up to the brink of injuring the opponent, versus a type of sport where the ultimate goal is not essential in relationship to that? Like, someone may get hurt, but it's incidental, accidental. It's not part of what the game itself entails. Does that make sense? Because to me, UFC, and maybe even some ways you could play hockey, and some ways you could play football, and some ways you could do things like that, seem different than baseball and basketball as far as the end goal. What do you think of that, Matt? Is some kind of dividing line?
Sure. Yeah. I understand it. I really do understand it. If our attempt here is to say what's permissible and what's not, it might be helpful. I find those approaches to ethics to be dead ends, and so I try to avoid them as much as I can. I prefer to ask, why do I want to do this in the first place? If we can get to the root of our motivation, as opposed to drawing black and white boundaries, this is good, this is bad, this is in, this is out. Those tend to lead us into dead ends as Christians and as from the perspective of ethics.
So can a UFC fighter have a good motivation, Matt?
Oh, sure. I would think so. Absolutely. I know plenty of people, plenty of guys I think that are fighters that are very, good, humble, good men.
But you don't think they should do it, though? Isn't that correct?
Right.
Why not? You have 1 minute.
Right.
1 minute.
I think that what I want to have a conversation about when it comes to mixed martial arts is masculinity. In other words, Pastor Bob said something that I think is worth pursuing. He said, men are going to do this anyway. Is that something we believe as Christians, that all men, that this is in our biological makeup?
I was quoting Driscoll on that, by the way.
Bob was quoting Driscoll.
Right. And is that something that we believe, that Christians believe?
Well, there's
If it's
more
not-
to explore. Let's do that on a part 2 of this show. I apologize. We could really only scratch the surface, but join us next week as we pick up, should Christians enjoy UFC, and should there be such a thing as fight churches, with ex-MMA fighter Matt Morin.
Hey, this is really part 2 of a talk that we started last Sunday with Matt Morin. Matt Morin out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, former cage fighter, if I can put it that way. We were talking about the ethics of sport, particularly a violent sport. Played a few clips from Pastor Mark Driscoll. We talked a little bit about the ethics of it. And we didn't get nearly as far as often is the case. And so we wanted to have a second show to explore it further and maybe even get into a phenomenon which I did not know about. I don't think Vermont did either, vocab. Fight churches, what's that all about?
Well, you want to play a clip already? How about this?
Well, no, let's not. That's a good point. Let's discuss this further. Can we go back and maybe make a distinction from the last,
Yes.
assuming the listeners listened to last week, to make a distinction between the intent of the sport? I mean, I guess I'd like to ask our guest, Matt, where do you draw the line between the most violent sport, which I guess you would say is that cage fighting? Is that the most violent sport that we have in America today?
That's a good question.
Well, what else would be up there? What would be the couple of the choices?
Yeah, boxing. I think obviously boxing is up there. Cage fighting is up there. Football, I would say, are probably our 3 most in American culture. Probably the hockey may be up there sometime. Are probably our 3 or 4 most, I think, brutal. They tend to take the most wear on the body and also the brain.
So you said something.
Are they violent? I don't know.
Yeah, you said something last week that I liked, and that is, why would we want to do this? Is that how you put it?
That is the central question. I mean, I think it's so important. I thank you for bringing it up. I think that is the central question, far more above what lines we draw, what's in and out, what we should and shouldn't do. I'm sure you've heard that saying before. As pastors, you tell your congregation not to should all over themselves. You can bleep that out if it sounds like it's too vulgar, but don't should all over yourself, because when you're doing ethics and you come down to should, and making a list of rules, it just raises so many problems. And so better to ask, why do I want to do this in the first place? What's at stake? What stories have formed me to this point? What voices am I hearing, or maybe not even hearing, but are playing in the background?
Do a lot of MMA fighters hear voices? Sorry.
Well, I mean,
after too many blows to the head, perhaps so.
Maybe ringing. Yeah.
But Matt, if you say it that way, what would you do? And you brought up 4 sports: MMA, boxing, football, and hockey. What would you say? So I'm going to pick one of the 2 lesser of the 2. What would you say if a hockey player said, I play hockey because I'm good at it, I like doing it, I make a good living doing it, and I think that I can glorify God by doing it? I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's what probably I would hope that most people would say that. I'm good at it, I enjoy it, I can't believe I get paid to play a game in all 4 of those instances. And that was certainly my case for getting into MMA. I loved wrestling. Not a whole lot of opportunities to wrestle after college. But there is this other thing. So let's give this a try, and I really enjoy it. And I would say that makes a lot of good sense to me.
Well, but is it your position, though, that some of these sports at least cross the line and a Christian should not engage in them? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just throw all my cards on the table here, because I know we have shorter time and I don't want to be enigmatic. I think that one of the reasons that I stopped fighting in cages was because I realized that I was a pawn in someone else's story of masculinity. That I was being used and pointed to by people to say, this is what a real man does. Look he's one-on-one. He's alone. He can make it on himself. And I think that's a complete opposite of what all humans are. All humans by necessity need one another. And so the idea of the Lone Ranger man is not a good one, or the Lone Ranger person is not a good one. It's had tremendously harmful impact throughout our society in many, many far-reaching ways. And so I refuse to be someone who props up that false story any longer.
Matt, is a UFC cage match honorable to the body?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's certainly destructive to the body, that's for sure.
Okay, so to me, that is my view, my understanding at this point. And I would like to at least say for VOCAB's position, I don't think Christians should engage in participating in UFC-type stuff, either as participants or as spectators who enjoy that. To me, I don't see why we'd enjoy, for no superior ethical reason. You're not defending anybody or anything like that, and it gets into your theory about just war, which some people are pacifists and they have a different understanding. That's fine. But for me, I would hold to some version of just war theory, meaning I do think you can do these types of things to defend the innocent, but there's no greater reason. And then watching that, it's hard for me to understand why we would enjoy watching that. Now, when we talk about the types of injuries these folks get that seem to be almost essential, it doesn't seem incidental. I mean, what type of injuries have you known people getting that are directly related to their involvement in this that may not be similar to other types of sports injuries? I mean, I'm curious about sort of some of the inside stuff you're aware of.
Oh, sure. Well, you've seen it all, I'm sure. Anderson Silva, not long ago, was a middleweight champ. He broke his shin bone.
How?
In a pretty grotesque injury. Well, just with a kick. He threw a kick. He went shin to shin with a competitor, and it folded. You just to see that stub area between the knee and the foot, to see that fold. That's a pretty gruesome thing. I don't think there's any injuries that are unique to MMA that you couldn't find in other places.
What are the rules that are supposed to protect fighters that they have in most of these? What are the specific rules? No eye gouging, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to pass a physical. It's very tightly monitored.
Right, but what are the rules they say here? You can't do this. Are you allowed to kick to the groin?
No.
Okay, so you can't do that. No eye gouging. What can you do? Can I be on top of opponent, punching him in the jaw, side to side, left to right?
Yes.
What about blood? What's the relationship to that? It stops when? It doesn't stop? How's that work?
In most cases, it depends where the blood's coming from. If you've got a broken nose, you'll be allowed to continue to fight. That's up to the discretion of the ringside doctor. If you've got a cut above your eye, just like in boxing, that seems to present a long-term, difficulty for your vision long-term, then they'll call it.
So,
but blood itself isn't a reason for stopping.
You can knee people in the face, correct?
That's correct.
You can kick them in the face directly, right?
That's right.
See, when this was first coming out, like sort of like the underground style, like I got a videotape of it. I worked at this restaurant and this dude was like, check this out. This is crazy. I didn't know what I was in for and all this. And I was actually fascinated by it. I wasn't really repulsed in the way that I sort of almost wish I was. But the match I saw specifically, dude jumps up on top of another dude, ends the match by beating him left to right as blood is flying out as he punches him in each direction. And as I thought about that and grew, I said, how can I enjoy that? How can I think that that's a good thing for one human to do to another for no reason? I don't.
Well, I mean, I remember first seeing it too. This was back when it wasn't as regulated as it now. There weren't leagues. It was just, I remember a friend of mine.
But the underground stuff still happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. I remember a friend of mine came over. I was like, watch this. It's just two guys wailing at each other. Yeah. Right. And it was brutal. I was like, man, I can't believe this is actually really happening. And that being said, I mean, I've seen a few. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of MMA fights, but I notice, they're very quick to stop the fight. Those there's it's not quite the way it was back in at least official MMA. Now, again, just getting us back to sort of it was almost, I feel like we're on two different tracks here. There's sort of the ethics of sports and what is
theology of sport and theology of the body.
theology of sports, the theology of body. That's sort of one
and
area.
Biblical definition of masculinity. All these tie in. And so here's to me. I'm just saying this. People can disagree, but I want them to think about it, because my experience with this is when I ask people about it, they basically say, "I enjoy it, so it's got to be cool. It's okay because it's fun to watch," and they kind of give credit to the skill of the fighter, the discipline, which are all true, but in the area of defining masculinity, in the area of honoring the body, in the area of what sport should be, in my opinion, in Christian ethical front, they fail on all. Standard UFC type stuff fails on all three.
So, vocab, what about hockey and football?
So, to me, I think there's more of a gray area, because football's actual goal is to score a touchdown or some other way that you score a point. It's not by definition to hurt another player. However, because of the way you have to play defense and the sort of vibe of it all, I don't personally like watching football. I wouldn't want to put a kid in it. To me, it's less clear cut. And that's where I would say the questions that Matt was asking would become more helpful. And I would say, okay, but just for me, more of turning away from it. I'll put it this way. If there was a thing to regulate football, like make it less legal or harder to get licenses for, I don't know if I would vote for that, because the libertarian streak in me. If there was something to regulate more of this UFC type stuff, I think I would vote to regulate it more. Maybe that kind of puts feet to it. That's just me, though. Ramon, comment on this, because I know I'm rambling my position, but I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I almost need more time to think about it. I got to ask a lot of questions. And thinking through this, because a theology of sports, I think motivation matters. What's the intent of what's being done? I don't think, so for example, we use football, sort of tackling someone, hitting someone, preventing someone from doing something,
right,
blocking someone. You could, I mean, there's malicious ways of doing that, and there's non-malicious ways of doing that.
And you're
right?
supposed to be protected, so there are differences. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing too.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, this is where, maybe some of the biggest comparisons, MMA versus boxing.
Yes.
That
I agree.
In some ways, because it's to what degree is it just we're putting protection, headgear, all these other different things like that. Olympic boxers is very interesting as well. They put headgear, they have gloves. The intent isn't so much we want to see knockouts; they want to see a good boxing match. And so I think the purpose, the intent of the sport, I think is an important question.
Does matter.
And I think I'd have to ask more. I'm sympathetic to your view. I don't know if I'm fully there.
Right, I understand.
I think it's worth asking questions. Definitely. I mean, getting back to the sort of masculinity issue, and we did mention the fight churches, so we probably should talk a little bit about that. The one thing I do want to say very clearly is I think a more biblical definition of masculinity, it is initiative. It is about standing for what's right and what's just. And that can be expressed in a lot of different ways. Like you can be a man who drives a hybrid, right, and likes tea and those kind of things. And some of those men are some of the most manly, or whatever.
Where did that come from?
Well, as opposed to like drinking beer all day, right? I mean, you could be a man who I think
I love tea.
There's some good teas out there.
He used to take it before he fought for the caffeine.
But yeah, I think that's important to say, that what we're saying is, you don't, and I know this applies to men in my church. To be a man doesn't mean sort of this, I call it sort of this peacock version of being a man. I got to sort of show my masculinity on my sleeve in these aggressive ways. Biblical masculinity is along the lines of what you talked about, Matt. I mean, when we look at Jesus, he was strong, he was confident, and yet he was caring, he was sympathetic, he wept, right, for the sake of other people. This is, going back to what we actually see in Scripture, we see masculinity, we see the values of masculinity expressed in a lot of different ways. And maybe that's the best way to put it.
Could I ask you a quick question, just because you all seem to have a pretty clear idea among yourself what biblical masculinity means, and just so I'm caught up on the conversation, if you could package it quickly for me so I get caught up, what is biblical masculinity? What's the essence of it?
It looks like Jesus. It glorifies God. It fulfills what men specifically were designed to do, and fulfills what Christians were designed to do, something like that.
Well, and I think it includes being a protector. I mean, you take a look at some of the imperatives of Ephesians 5 and so forth. So it does have those. There is a distinction between male and female, and male does have the aspect of being a protector. I guess the question, and that Ramon has said so well, is that does it include this sort of aggressiveness that to get back to that Driscoll quote from last week, which I wasn't agreeing with necessarily. I just said it. He basically said, yeah, men are going to do this, and so we might as well make it into a sport and have rules.
I think that's horrible reasoning, and I don't necessarily think it's true anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because for Mark Driscoll, and again, I'm using Mark Driscoll as a foil here to represent a much broader perspective. In the mainstream, there is this notion that men are inherently X. Men do this. Men fight. That's the way that we are biologically wired or created. In a kind of a language of a more theological language, created to do this fighting. If you look throughout history, this is just what men do. And so that idea circulates everywhere. I mean, it does work in our militaries. It does work in our homes. It does work in the way that we have arranged kind of our economic structures and inequalities in the United States. So that idea that this is what men have to do is popular. And of course, the Christian challenge to that is Jesus.
Matt, what would you say about the military?
I would love to be back as a guest at another time for this. I think that the military, which military? The United States military?
Yes.
That the United States military is filled with women and men who probably are one of the last remaining kind of clear pictures of courage that we have in the United States. And it would be my hope that the church in the United States could be equally, if not more courageous, as the examples that we have from these women and men in the United States military, that we could be as courageous, if not more, in our profession of Jesus, in our profession of blessed are the peacemakers, in our profession of turn the other cheek, in our profession of you've heard it said, but I say unto you. I think that it takes a lot of courage for the church in America to be able to do that, and I hope that following the example of courage that we've seen in the military, that the church could also be as courageous.
Now let's play this clip from the Colbert Report. It's about this topic. You guys will enjoy this.
People aren't going to church. Evidently, somebody blabbed about the God is everywhere loophole. Thankfully, this year, some churches began spending money on giveaways and prizes in hopes of boosting attendance on Easter Sunday. At last, prizes. I mean, what else were they going to lure people in with? The promise of unconditional love and eternal salvation? They gave that out last year.
That's actually a good point first before we discuss this fight church, because it shows your ecclesiology, actually. What the church has to offer through the person and work of Jesus Christ is of insurmountable importance and greatness, and yet we think we got to find some other gimmick. And that leads us into these fight churches. Here goes.
Now, folks, falling attendance is worst among men. No surprise there. Christianity has become unmanly. A lot of priests don't even have girlfriends. This is why I was happy to hear that some churches have found a way to put the dude back in Deuteronomy. According to the New York Times, a small but growing number of evangelical churches have embraced mixed martial arts to convert young men. I mean, that makes sense. It's like Jesus said, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek, then keep turning until you deliver a roundhouse kick to his jaw.
You like this, Ramon? Funny, right?
This is very funny.
In a second, he's going to play the trailer, and I'm going to pause it before he plays it.
All this hardcore MMA church action is featured in a new documentary called Fight Church.
As Christians.
All right, so I'm going to play. He plays clips from the documentary called Fight Church, and then he interacts with some of them. So that's what I'm about to play, unless somebody wants to comment before I hit the play button.
So, I mean, what exactly happens in these churches?
That's what we're going to hear. It's it's pretty wild. I sent you an article in the show notes where actually someone died when a church was doing this. Wow. It's a bottom one. I think it was in Oklahoma. Check that one out while we play this. All right, here we go.
There are times where you take shots. That's where the Bible gives you your training. I get all the time, I don't look like the typical pastor, and that's okay.
We'll just be a couple of God-fearing men punching each other in the face.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Pastor versus Pastor.
If you really want the enemy off your trail, you got to learn to put your foot on his neck. Somebody shout Jesus.
Yes, somebody shout Jesus, but probably not the guy with the foot on his neck.
Now, to be fair, that pastor in that clip was incorrectly exegeting about how we interact with demonic power, is my understanding of the clip, like more demonic warfare. But the pastor is kind of transferring that into the MMA world, but then Colbert just takes it as strictly man-to-man combat. But it's still for a good laugh.
All this time, we've been turning to Jesus for answers to our deepest questions, but we missed the most central question of all.
Can you love your neighbor as yourself and then at the same time knee him in the face as hard as you can?
Wow. Yes, you can. Especially if he keeps raking his leaves into your yard. This is the last warning, Alan. And rest assured, folks, all this face kneeing is based on Scripture.
There's actually a cool verse in the Bible that says, "Be wary when all men speak well of you." If everybody loves you, you're doing something wrong.
Yes, and nothing makes you not be loved by someone quite like shattering his clavicle. Which means you got to be doing something right. But at the end of the day, Fight Church is about spreading the word.
This is a battlefield. We need to charge them, not wait for them to come to us.
At the end of the day, it's about reaching people with the gospel, regardless of what you do to introduce them into...
You guys hear that? Regardless of what you do to introduce them. That's your soteriology and ecclesiology. The clip's almost over.
Relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yes, it's a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's like a blind date during which you may be blinded. But I say we can take hand-to-hand holy war even further. I mean, if watching two Christians attack each other is fun, what about a Christian and a lion? I mean, with action like that, I bet you could fill up a stadium. We'll be right back.
And he closes by showing a clip of the Colosseum in Rome.
Wow.
Which actually, I think, even though that's interesting, I mean, you hear some underlying anti-Christian sentiment in the whole thing, but I do find some of this just a few steps below gladiatorial games. Matt, comment on that clip in Fight Churches. We've only got a few minutes left.
Yeah, that's a great documentary. I encourage anyone who wants to get into this deeper to check out that documentary. It's a real good one. The gentleman who they're in the clip was pushing back in the documentary is named Scott Sullivan, and he's a former U.S. kickboxing champion. The documentary part of the story is it follows his decision to leave the kickboxing world as well, the competitive kickboxing world. I believe he pursues a master in divinity or something like that, or a teaching at a Bible church. So definitely get in, take a look at that documentary. I think it was a fair documentary. It doesn't really try to pillar anybody. My own feelings are. I heard this earlier in the conversation that both of you guys did a Vermone.
Those are fighting words right there.
Sorry about that. I deserve it. Vermone. Sorry about that. Both of you guys were trying to describe why cage fighting appealed to you in the past, but it no longer does, and having a hard time pinning that down and saying, I'd like to think more about this. And thinking more about it is a good thing to do. But also, I want to say that when you find your desires radically transformed, you don't always need to be able to explain it. You can just witness to it. You can just testify to it. You can just tell people that I once was blind, but now I see. That's all I know. I once wanted to do this, and I find that my desires have been reshaped. And I don't know how to say that except for to give thanks to God for it. And that in itself is a huge testimony to the power of the grace of Christ. I never in my life, someone who was raised, thinking that men had to be a certain way and who fought for so long, would have anticipated that I'd be in a church full of Christian pacifists and
those are good words to close by, Matt, but I do encourage all believers to live out the fruit of the Spirit, including gentleness.